Hi, Max Clark. I'm going to wade right into it with this one and share a conversation I had the other day. And the crux of it was Ubiquiti versus Meraki and why. And I'll kind of expand it a little bit, just give you the rest of stuff like Ubiquiti, Meraki, Aruba, Juniper, Fortinet, Palo Alto, yada, yada, yada. And what we actually see in enterprises and what I would do in most of these situations for myself and what I have done for myself. The first thing is let's just talk about Ubiquiti. Ubiquiti is enterprise-ish, inexpensive network infrastructure. For the majority of people, the trade in features and functionality between a Ubiquiti box and something else is not going to be noticeable. And this is the reality and the secret with Ubiquiti. There are specific things that it doesn't do that other people do better. Ruckus has better antenna design. It's going to have higher density devices per access point. Absolutely. You're going to see better roaming and device handoff with basically Meraki and Aruba and Ubiquiti and Juniper Mist on all these different you're going to get better access point performance. You're going to get better roaming. You're going to get better handoff of devices moving across and inside of your environment. You're going to have better control over your switch stack. What do you need to do with VLANs and routing between VLANs? And do you have a lot of network interfaces where you have to have some sort of campus with a core and leaf and spline kind of architecture? You're not going to see that with like the Ubiquitis of the world. You're going to see that with other manufacturers that are actually producing the big iron of switches. Performance through the switches, of course, it's going to be different. You're going to see different things. Firewalls. Ubiquiti doesn't have high availability on their firewalls. Hopefully by the time you're watching this recording, they do. It would be amazing. But in today, 2024, there's still not an ability to do high availability on their firewalls. If you need high availability, the Ubiquiti firewall doesn't do it for you. You can't go there. If you are a do-it-yourself or you're a small business, and in this case, I'll put a small business in the, really in the small size, like under 100 people in a location, Ubiquiti is probably going to be just fine for you. It's going to be very inexpensive. It's a one-time purchase. Maybe you're hosting the controller software and you're paying something for that, but it's going to be very minimal to do that. And for the most part, it's going to work probably just fine. And your users will be okay with it. 20 people in an office, go Ubiquiti. You're going to need one AP, one switch, one firewall. It's going to be fine. 50 users, depending on your footprint, probably still only one AP. 100 users, maybe your office is now big enough that you've got 2 or 3 APs. But even if you bought Ubiquiti and then decided you hated it and you wanted to replace it, the amount of money that you spent on it for whatever time that you were running it is not substantial. I guess now we call it network as a service. So any NAS vendors that are offering, managed network infrastructure are going to use Meraki switches and access points. It's stable. It's available. They've got global distribution. They can warehouse it. They can get parts replacement for it. They can manage it through a single service provider console. The devices are designed so when they plug into a network, they phone home automatically. You don't have to tell it how to phone home. Meraki is great switch and access point infrastructure. It works. It's expensive. That's your trade, right? It's phenomenal. It's more money. And the rub with Meraki is that you are going to buy the hardware and you're going to pay a subscription license for it. You are going to pay an annual fee, and if you don't, it's going to turn off. Effectively, you just can't use it anymore. If you're an SMB, if you're a small SMB, if you're a small business, probably don't want to go the Meraki route unless your service provider that you're using to manage your network infrastructure is deploying it because that's what they manage. Okay, great. Nothing wrong with it. You're not deficient by having Meraki. Meraki firewalls are probably not what you want to run. Cisco is trying to unify and create their version of SASE on top of Meraki is embedding and overlaying the OpenDNS umbrella infrastructure with it. It's got a ways to go. I won't get into a Meraki bash session. It is incredible when you actually start digging into enterprise networks and enterprise service provider, real service providers supporting large enterprises. You're not going to see a lot of Meraki MX firewalls. You'll see a lot of Meraki switches and access points, and then you're going to see either Palo Alto firewalls or you're going to see Fortinet firewalls, depending on what the service provider, basically based on what the service provider gets the best deal on and has the most support infrastructure for and what their contract looks like. If they negotiated a sweetheart deal with Fortinet, they're going to sell you a Fortinet firewall. They have whatever with Palo, they're going to sell you a Palo firewall. Differences between Palo and Fortinet, you probably wouldn't even know. I'm not saying this in terms of a judgment of like one's better or one's worse. I'm just saying that like that selection process for most service providers is just like what they had a better contract and pricing for, and that's why they did one versus the other. Well, there's a little bit more to that. Fortinet will give you more SD-WAN functionality functionality natively into the firewall, then Palo will. There's a plus for Fortinet and why service providers use them, because they can replicate and give you reasonable SD-WAN functionality in that Fortinet firewall. Or you can skip all this and you can just go to a real SASE environment. You can run Meraki switches and access points, or Ubiquiti switches and access points, and you can select a SASE vendor that has an SD-WAN and the secure web gateway and remote access CTNA, CASB, firewall as a service, and you can just run a really dumb network. And I don't want to say this to like degrade Ubiquiti at all, but in most cases, if you're deploying Ubiquiti, you're probably thinking of your network as a dumb network to some degree, right? Like I had a client years ago describe his office environments to me as just fancy Starbuckses. Like there's nothing here, there's nothing running. It is a distribution layer to connect people to the internet. They were using an SSE vendor for their security. So literally they had agents running on all the devices. He was just like, we just have a fancy Starbucks. It's a very fast internet connection. There's no security on it. It doesn't need security because there's nothing there. There's nothing in the office. We're not hosting stuff out of the office. We're not building policy based on a perimeter or the edge in the office. It's a fancy Starbucks. So Ubiquiti fits that bill fantastic. If you want to have a very simplistic, very basic, good network, Ubiquiti fits the bill. By the way, I have a lot of Ubiquiti running, tons of Ubiquiti running, and it works great. And it's there for a reason, and we're using it for a reason. I have a lot of Meraki running. It works great. It's amazing. It's fantastic. I wish they hadn't crippled Meraki Go for home users because, it was cool. We have a lot of Meraki running. We have a lot of Fortinet. We have a lot of Palo Alto, and we have a lot of SSE, and we have a lot of SASE vendors. We have it all. These things are, if you're trying to make a decision and you're looking at this and you're saying, well, should I go with, Ruckus? If you go with Ruckus, you're going to get a great access point, but you're going to have to use different vendors for your switching and firewall infrastructure. CommScope will sell you a switch. You can make a determination whether or not you want that switch or not. Probably not. If you go with HP Aruba, you can buy the Aruba switches, and you can also get the HP Enterprise switches. With HP Enterprise buying Juniper, I have no idea what's going to happen with the HP Enterprise switching, with the Aruba switches and access points, and with the Juniper switches and the Juniper access points and Juniper Mist. I don't know if this is just an acquisition for consolidation or if this was an acquisition where they wanted to integrate technology. We'll see. We'll see in a couple of years. It has to get approved, and then they have to figure out what they're doing, and Game of Thrones has to go on with these product lines. The crux of my advice that I gave in this conversation between, should we use Ubiquiti or should we use something else, Ubiquiti versus Meraki, but Meraki was so expensive is basically the question. My answer was use Ubiquiti. Like if you're at a point where you're price sensitive to that and you're actually considering this, like I can't spend the money on Meraki, buy Ubiquiti. You are not the use case it should be in the Meraki world. If you've got a large enterprise and you've got large environments and you've got a lot of users and you've got to layer in service providers to help you manage it, and you need to be able to hire and onboard staff efficiently, and you need to, you're going to be buying Meraki, and it's going to be perfect for you. So don't sweat it. Like, don't spend any time on it, and just do it and just move forward and focus on other things. You got plenty of other problems you got to be, dealing with, and you got plenty of other demands within the business, and that's where you should be spending your time, not on this other part. If you're struggling with a Ubiquiti versus a Meraki purchase, just buy Ubiquiti. And if you got Ubiquiti or Meraki, buy an SD-WAN. Don't use their internal SD-WAN functions because they're garbage and they don't work. Get an SD-WAN and put it outside those boxes. If you, want to take a step into the future and stop investing in antiquated, security and firewalls, if you've got firewalls in place or SD-WAN in place already, go and get an SE vendor. And if you've got the opportunity to throw the whole thing out, go and get a true SASE vendor and use them end to end and be happy and rejoice. I mean, for lack of a better word, this stuff is like, you don't have to build networks like we did in 2005. 20 years later, and there's a lot of really cool, easy stuff, great things on the market today, and they work great. And they'll make your life better, and they'll solve lots of problems. I'm Max Clark. I hope this helps. If you have any questions, comment below, send me an email, and I'll get back to you.
I feel it.